what are there any tools that you use on the regular that could be useful for us to keep in mind as we extend into the different categories of negotiations and ways to approach those negotiations?
Yeah, there can be a couple different. First of all, just trying to figure out what's really going on is the real issue, and then how can I get an approach where I'm most likely to get the best possible outcome. So there's always more than meets the eye, and there's a certain few cliches, but the real issue is there's always a better deal, or there's no deal at all. So first of all, my first thing is I want to find out whether or not there's a deal at all, or whether or not it's a bad deal, and then I'm going to walk away really fast because those are going to be complete wastes of time. It's not a sin to not get the deal. It's a sin to take a long time to not get the deal. Or it's a sin to take a long time to get a bad deal. So I want to know, I'm going to try to figure out real quick whether or not, is there a cutthroat on the other side of the table? Is it somebody I could trust? I'm leaning a little more inclined to dealing with the difficult people now, as long as I don't give in. So I want to diagnose early on what the possibilities are. Now, if I'm curious, if I'm actually interested. Now, another aspect of the mindset is, like, if I'm in a great mood, like if I'm just going to be playful, a couple of really huge personal negotiation wins recently was when I was just trying to be playful. I mean, I was in a great mood and I'm joking around. And great negotiation is not exciting, it's astonishing. And so I lose a suitcase in an airport the other day. And I'm walking into the lost luggage place. And I'm in a great mood because I'm home and I'm happy to be home. And I'm going to get a good night's sleep. And even though it's late in the day, I'm just happy. And I get ready to walk into the lost luggage store where these people are battered children. Like, they expect you, they know that you expect them to wave a magic wand. And poof, your luggage is going to be there. So for whatever reason, that's what I say when I walk in the door. This young lady says, how can I help you? Well, first of all, how you could help me is obvious because I'm in a lost luggage. There's only one reason I'm in here. So that's kind of a silly question. And I go, I need you to wave a magic wand. And she just laughs and she looks at me. She ends up walking me out to the carousel, climbing up on the carousel, and she walks down a ramp the luggage comes out of. And I guarantee you they're not supposed to do that. And she sticks her head and she looks around. She comes back out. And I've never seen any of these people leave the office, let alone walk back to the carousel. And she says, wait here. And she disappears into the bowels of the airport, which looks like a superhighway down there, right? Like, God knows what it looks like underneath the airport. And pretty soon the carousel starts up again. And my bag and another bag pops out. This other poor schmuck is sitting there waiting. And I'm like, I have never seen anybody do this, ever. Like, normally they say, here's a number, we'll call you in 24 hours. It might show up at your house. And I look around at there's another young lady there, and I say, please tell her thank you for me. I got to go, because she doesn't come back out for like almost 10 minutes. And on my way out, she comes out the door, and she high-fives me, and she says, how's that for waving a magic wand? And that was the magic phrase. And I never would have said it to her if I wasn't playful in a moment. And I've got a couple of others, like when I was just playful and I'm joking with people, almost at my expense. It's shocking, astonishing, what you can get people to do if you hit them the right way.
So interesting. I wonder what it tapped into, but it sounds like it might have tapped into her sense that everybody's always asking me for a magic wand kind of ability, but finally somebody just said it directly, and that would be kind of fun to actually play that role.
Overall, I'm pretty steady. Well, the late night FM DJ voice that I'm not sure that I coined the phrase, but kind of famous for, to calm you down also calms me down. Mm-hmm. So if I get bent out of shape, I will, and a conversation gets heated, I'll switch into that voice with the intention of calming you down, because that's the hostage negotiator's voice. But it'll calm me down too. Like intentionally going to that voice tamps down the negative emotions, which I'm convinced make me dumber in the moment, interfere with my capacity to process information. Got reasons for that.
The auditory system has this property where, of course, there are neurons, nerve cells that respond to different frequencies of sound. Low frequency, deeper tones, and high frequency, squeals and that sort of thing.
Right.
Okay, that's pretty straightforward. Just like we have neurons that respond to different colors or different angles of light in the room.
Right.
But what I learned, and I confirmed with a good friend of mine, who's an auditory neuroscientist and neurosurgeon, his name's Eddie Cheng, he was a guest on this podcast previously, is that low frequency sounds of the sort that your voice is, that late night FM DJ voice, are responded to in the brain by neurons, no surprise there, but the frequency that those neurons fire is also low frequency. In other words, when you speak in your low voice,
right,
the other person's brain hears that and starts firing in a low frequency tone.
Right.
In other words, it entrains to your voice, not just the timing, but it's actually like you're essentially playing an emotional piano down in the low keys of their mind. Now, when you go up to the high frequencies, the neurons can't follow that high frequency. So there's something special about low frequency sound that actually changes the emotional tone. Let's talk about how to get to a win-win.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of interesting things there. First of all, the phrase win-win, because win-win is just great collaboration. I mean, in point of fact, it should be win-win, which might only be emotional win-win. Now, the phraseology win-win, I know that if someone opens a negotiation with me and they say right off the bat, look, I want to do a win-win deal with you, that correlates extremely highly with someone who's trying to pick my pocket. So if you use that phrase in the first 5 minutes, I already know where you're coming from. You're trying to get me to drop my guard. It's you win, I lose. So, and this came up on an Instagram post I put up recently, which is essentially watch out for the person that says win-win. Now, I didn't say win-win is bad. I said watch out for the person that says it. Also, you got to be cautious if you're like some of the win-win mindset, then people set themselves up to just get slaughtered by the person who's expressing a desire for win-win and looking to pick their pocket. Like if I feel win-win in my heart, you go, let's do a win-win deal. If I don't watch it, I'm like, okay, what do you want? And then I find myself giving away the store. So there's a lot behind the win-win phraseology that you have to have a complete understanding of. In point of fact, both sides should feel good about the outcome. And isn't that the definition of win-win? Well, kind of, sort of. But it's how they feel about it more than really what they got. So in a benevolent negotiation among friends, where are we going to go to eat? Where are we going on vacation? What route are we going to take? People really just want to be heard out more than anything else, which operationally seems to be, I don't understand how it's going to make any difference. It makes all the difference in the world. And what's the best way for somebody to feel heard out? Well, I'm going to start out by describing to you, not telling you, but describing to you what my best guess is on your perspective. Because it's really calibrating me actually finding out what your position is. And the only way I can find out what your position actually is, I'm gonna increase you telling me if I start taking a guess at it first. Because you're immediately, right away, you're immediately going to tell me either I'm right or I'm wrong. You're going to correct me. Correction is a satisfying thing to do. And you're going to be much more candid with me if you're correcting me than if I'm asking you. So and you'll feel good about correcting me. So there's all these great emotional lubricants to me getting you to correct me. So I'm going to start out by saying, like, here's what I think you're thinking. Here's how I think you're approaching this. Here's what I think you're wanting out of this. Not what you should be, but what you probably are based on your perspective. And that's going to accelerate the conversation exponentially. Like, it's ridiculous how much faster things are going to go. And then it becomes both an information gathering and a rapport building process simultaneously instead of separately.
Is it important to get into the mindset of the person you're negotiating with quickly, using the hypothesis generating method?
Yeah.
And if so, could you give an example of how that played out in your previous work?
Yeah, the indicators are really there. I mean, once you sort of lose your illusions about how you think things should play out, then the patterns of behavior are generally pretty quick and clear. And just because you don't like the patterns, like with Al-Qaeda, we recognize the patterns, and knowing what they are doesn't mean you can change what they are. And Al-Qaeda in 2004-ish timeframe was very clear about killing people on deadline. And we had to recognize that. So there becomes a pattern of behavior, and it's usually specificity in what they say. And this is all human nature. Like if you're in a business negotiation and they say, you know, we're going to do something horrible here, you know, we're going to walk out. You know, that's fairly nonspecific. And if they say, look, if we don't get this by this specific deadline, if we don't get these specific things met by this specific time, that's pretty specific. It's specificity. You're looking for it. I learned to look for it in kidnapping negotiations. We're working a case again in the Philippines. And the bad guys say, you know, if we don't get a ransom for the son, 17-year-old boy at the time is kidnapped, you know, you tell his father he's going to lose an egg. And that's a euphemism for losing a child. And early on, when that threat came through on our side of the table, everybody's like, oh my God, they're going to kill him. You know, this is really bad. We got to make sure the family can pay the ransom. I'm like, no. It didn't say when it was going to happen. They didn't say how it was going to happen. They didn't say who was going to do it. You know, the basic specificity of who, what, when, and where. Like, they left themselves an out here, a very clear out. And we never said we were going to do it. We never said when it was going to happen. We never said which child. You know, they're just trying to scare you. They're throwing out something vague. I said, we got plenty of time to play with this. We got to push this all the way through the process and to the end. Now, later on in that case, when the family tried to deliver a ransom and it was screwed up by God knows who, the bad guys came up back on the phone and they said, if we don't get paid tomorrow, your son dies. And I said, all right, now that's specific. And these guys sound like they mean it. And so we're going to have to make sure this thing goes down tomorrow, or that's the end of this kid. The same rule applies in any negotiation. The other side is going to give in when they feel like they've gotten everything they can. Kidnappers. I'd be asked by an ambassador, asked by an FBI commander, when's this going to be over? When the bad guys feel like they've gotten everything they could. Not when they did, but when they felt like they did. So our job is just make them feel it sooner. So, you know, how hard do you make it innocently on the other side? Everybody wants to feel like they got a good day's pay for a good day's work. So if you let them feel like they're in charge and you make them work by asking them innocent how and what questions, which are very hard and fatiguing to answer, then you're going to get to the point where you're going to get a solid outcome where you don't get double dipped, and they're going to be happy that it's over because they felt like they got everything they could. It could be your data, could be your bank account, could be anything. The other side is going to be satisfied with the outcome when they feel like they've worked for it. And in business negotiations, you're selling your car, and you put a price tag on your car, and the guy walks up to you and says, I'll give you full amount right now. What's your reaction? I should have asked for more. Maybe I won't sell my car. You know, every human interaction, the other side wants to feel like that they earned what they got.
But I've heard it said before that if somebody you don't know, but maybe also somebody you know, places a real sense of urgency on, you know, need the money now, or I need you to do something right away, or else, not a threat of physical violence, but that any request for expediting something is a red flag.
Yeah.
That it's likely to be a scam. You know, very seldom do you need to click on the link within 24 hours, right? I mean, how could that possibly be, right?
Right. A friend of mine, somebody got a hold of his phone number not that long ago, and I was getting texts from his number. So I'm like, look, man, I got some real problems. Look, I need some money from you now. It was a friend's number. And I remember when I first saw it, actually, when I first saw it, I was really busy, and I felt bad that I didn't get back to him that day. So a couple of weeks later, I get the text again. You got a real problem. You got to get back to me right now. So I decide, if it's really my buddy, I am going to help him right now. I got to make sure it's really my buddy. And I said, hey, man, you know, you didn't raise this at all last time I saw you in Vegas, because I'd seen him in Vegas recently. And he's like, yeah, you know, I was busy. I couldn't bring it up. And so I'm thinking like, all right, so there's no direct confirmation or denial. We had breakfast together in Vegas. So then I shoot back. I say like, and man, I got to tell you something. That was such a crazy night, and I still owe you money from them. So now it wasn't a crazy night. It was breakfast, and I didn't owe him money. And his next response was like, yeah, don't worry about it. You know, you can make that up to me with this. So I'm like, all right, cool. So now I start making stuff up. But I started it all by just checking the source. If it was my friend, I would have helped him immediately. And I need to throw something at him that's going to confirm that it's him and that I'm there for him. But I'm also going to put a little bit of a curve in there that if he doesn't catch, I know it's a con. And then I'm going to have fun with it. When I was working kidnappings, the very last thing we'd always have the family get the bad guys to say it last, not first, but last, was we'd actually get a verbal promise to let them go. Again, at the end, because we've been talking to them long enough at this point in time, we got a pretty good idea of what they sound like when they're lying and what they sound like when they're telling the truth. If somebody tells the truth, they pretty much tend to tell the truth the same way every time, if they tell the truth. You talk to somebody long enough, you got a line on, do they ever tell the truth? And if they do, what does it sound like? People lie 20 ways. They tell the truth one way. So we've been coaching in negotiations with the kidnappers long enough that we know what they sound like when they tell the truth. So when they ask at the very end, if we paid, you promise to let them go, it's not that they answered, but how they answered it. And that'll be the last thing to seal the deal. You know, how do you continually stack the odds in your favor for implementation?
Do you have a bodily, like a somatic sensor for lying? The reason I ask is years ago I had the experience of knowing somebody, and they turned out to be a generally good person, but I sensed early on that something was like off. I couldn't relax around them.
Right.
I just couldn't relax around them. And I could not tell you why, but it was as if I couldn't even identify the neuroanatomy of it. You know, I might say it was the vagus nerve or something, but I teach neuroanatomy and I can't point to one pathway in the body. There was something about my autonomic response that would just start cranking up when I was around them. Like something is off, something is off, something else. And I kid you not, 5 years later, I discovered a series of lies that all ratcheted together that were actually pretty meaningless in the total context of things. But I remember thinking at that moment, oh my goodness, like my system knew. And you know, for all my knowledge of neuroscience, I can't tell you to this day like what it was in my biology, but it had something to do with my bodily response. It wasn't just a thought, like that doesn't quite add up, or I feel like I'm getting the runaround, or this. It was a physical sensation. Are you familiar with that experience?
Yeah, well, it's a little bit what you guys and your colleagues are still discovering, the science behind the gut. And what we are actually teaching, my company now, we're teaching people, learn the difference between your gut and your amygdala, for lack of a better term, your fear centers, and know which one is which and listen to your gut. Your gut is ridiculously accurate. Now, where does that information come from? One of your podcasts recently I was listening to, we were talking about olfactory cues, right? The smells. Like, I never thought of that, of course. What was the term for the molecules that you're putting off that
pheromones.
Pheromones.
What are
pheromones
molecules
going to get kicked out? Like, of course, and that's why some of the great investigators I knew would say, I can just smell it. I can smell it. So what all is feeding your gut, and what are the senses that the science hasn't yet discovered? You can't make me believe, I will never believe that the life force stops at the surface of our skin, that there's energy and that we can pick up on the energy. I mean, our gut is being fed by all these different inputs that we're aware of or that we have yet to be made aware of. The tone of voice doesn't match their words. The head tilt. You've got a supercomputer in your brain. Your gut is incredible if you could listen to it instead of your fear centers. And as soon as you start listening to your gut, you can't explain it at the time, but you got a bad feeling in your gut. And later on, then you saw it all came together, where your brain was picking up these cues. Your brain was probably when you were in their presence. There's got to be an odor somebody gives off when they're intentionally deceiving. You didn't know that was a smell, and maybe you couldn't have consciously smelled it, but you're still picking it up. So, long answer to, I'm a very big believer in the gut. I think there's science that we know and yet to discover that tells us that the gut is just.
So when you're doing negotiations and you're hearing somebody's voice on the phone, there are a lot of cues. When you're face-to-face, there are additional cues. There's their face. And then, of course, if the negotiations are being done by text over a computer or a phone, it's a very diminished environment for information. So maybe we could talk about each of those, because we live in those landscapes. If we're face-to-face and we're negotiating, you're listening, of course, to what I want, what I'm insisting on. You're working that process from your side. What are you paying attention to visually?
It's more, are things in alignment? There's layman's data. The words, the way it's said, and look on people's face, and how are they weighed and how they play out. There's a ratio out there that very unscientific, 738-55, 7% words, 38% delivery, 55% body language. People want to argue about it all the time, whether or not that's accurate. As a rule of thumb, we throw that out there, but I tell people the most important issue is, do they line up? So I'm not going to look for, like, when do you raise your eyebrow or when do you look up and to the left? I'm really just going to try to get a gut feeling whether or not I think these things are lining up, whether they're in alignment or whether they're out of line. And then I'm going to be real careful about what meaning I assign to that. Affective cues, changes in your tone of voice, changes in your movement. And that's one of the reasons why we don't teach reading people's body language, because it's completely contextual to you and the moment. So if I convince myself that, a raise of the eyebrow means this, it's out of context. I was in a negotiation once where I threw out a figure to somebody, and I some kind of look off to the side and look back and accepted my offer. And I made the mistake of not saying to them, the appropriate thing for me to say at the time would have been, seems like something just crossed your mind. Because the only completely true observation, if they look to the side and look back, something crossed their mind. Now, I read it at the moment of saying that they had more money. And I found out after the fact that was wrong. They were stretched to the limit. The look of hesitation didn't mean that they were holding stuff back, but I read it wrong. And I didn't bother to check on the affective cue that I saw. So what am I babbling about? What I'm babbling about is if we're in a negotiation, and whether or not I'm listening to your tone of voice or watching your body language or your words, if I see you shift at all, I should pay attention that there was a shift in your affective behavior, but I need to find out what was behind it as opposed to making an assumption as to what it meant. So yeah, I'm going to watch, I'm going to get my gut feeling, and I'm going to say, sounds like there's some hesitation, or it looks like something just crossed your mind. Or even if I can't attribute it to a specific affective move, I might say, it feels like there's something in the way here. That's me listening to my gut. I'll throw out an observation on whatever any of those might be, just to go back over the ground a little bit and double check. Because the other thing about negotiating in person is you're going to give me more information physically than I can actually process. And if you say something that's thought-provoking, I'll stop and think about it. And while I'm stopping and thinking about what you just said, I'm missing all your cues. So all the skills that we teach, the labels, the mirrors, the open-ended questions, which seem like we're going back and plowing the ground again, we are, because I didn't pick up all the information the first time. There's just more there than I can get. And so I need to go back over it a couple of times with you just so I get it right without making you feel interrogated. You actually feel heard. And you actually get to go back. There's a documentary film that's been done on my company called Tactical Empathy. So we screened the thing in Vegas last year. I see it, I love it. I'm not a good judge of a film about me. I'm going to love it no matter what. It's about me. But I tell Nick that night, oh man, I love it. This is great. 2 days later, I find out, I realize there's a huge problem. I've already told him it's okay. So I got to get him, I'm going to text him, and then I'm going to call him, and we got to fix it now. It's a Sunday. Text message. I sent him a 2-line text. It's now a bad time to talk. I got something you don't want to hear. 2 lines. Now, what were my other options? I could have called him. Nick and I got a great relationship. I call him. If he's in a position to pick up the phone, doesn't matter what he's doing, he's going to answer the phone. He already knows he ain't going to like what he's going to hear. I'm prepping him for bad news. Get him on the phone. Like, look, I know what I said. We got a problem. We got to get Derek on camera. Derek is a guy in my team. And I'm shocked that I haven't made him part of the documentary. This is going to be incomplete without Derek. We got to get Derek on film. We can't show this to anybody else until we get him on film and make a part of it. Immediately, he's in problem-solving mode. He goes, okay. We go through this whole conversation in less than 10 minutes. Now, think of the normal negotiation. Hey, Nick, how are you? What's going on today? Are you in a good mood? Hey, how the kids doing? All this time-wasting conversation. If I'd have set him up with that normal, he would also, he could have legitimately said, are you out of your mind? We've been working on this for a year. You didn't bring this up in a year. Not only that, you already told me 2 days ago at the showing in Vegas that you loved it. And now, a year and a half into this project, you're bringing up all these new problems. That would have been the normal negotiation.
So if I understand correctly, by setting the context in a very direct and succinct way,
right,
he goes into it in a problem-solving mode with you. Whereas if you do the tour of all the things that are going well in life,
yeah, hey, how are you?
Yeah, the sort of we'll keep this PG. You know, the mud sandwich approach. You know, they teach you that. And just ask, is there a way to have that conversation in any of the contexts I just mentioned, in as you so beautifully described it, a straight shooter manner where it's direct, it's honest, but it lands soft because what we're talking about here is feelings of rejection. And nobody likes feeling rejected. Right? I don't know anybody that likes being fired. Even from jobs they don't like, people's egos suffer.
Right. So if you got to terminate a relationship, regardless of what it is, the quicker you do it, the less painless it is, the sooner people can move on. Stop trying to save yourself. Realize how human beings handle pain. If anything, human beings are incredibly resilient if given the opportunity to brace themselves first.
I agree. Thank you for that. There's a concept that a lot of people haven't heard of, and I'm confident in saying that because I hadn't heard of it until recently, despite spending a lot of time in the literature around dopamine and motivation. And it's a term from psychology that is being used a little bit more now, and it's ego depletion.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept, and I've been wanting to run this by you for a while, but I saved it for our discussion today. The idea with ego depletion is pretty simple. It's that the molecule dopamine does many things in the brain, but one of the things that it absolutely does is it holds us to goal-directed behavior that's associated with our sense of self. Like, I want to accomplish this. I want to get to that. And the whole notion of ego depletion involves the idea, and this has been a data substantiated observation, that when people have to fight to be right or to defend their position for a period of time, eventually that depletes. And it seems to be, at least in part, dopamine mediated, because defending one's position takes work.
Right.
Earlier you talked about running somebody down, wearing them out. And I wonder, as I just throw this concept out to you cold here, whether or not that calls to mind any examples from your work where you felt like, okay, like this person could really hold, but if I just kept pressing, eventually they'd tilt.
Right.
So ego depletion. I have a feeling a lot of what you did in your profession was running down their dopamine to the point where then they are operating from a different place where they're not defending the ego. They're actually thinking more practically about the whole situation. Does it have any kind of texture of meaning to you?
Yeah, no, I would agree. And I would draw the distinction, first of all, in hostage negotiation, there's two kind of hostage takings if there's a demand. And there's going to be contained and uncontained, which is just literal definition. Contained is bad guys in a bank, like at the Chase Bank in Brooklyn way back when. You got them surrounded, they can't get away. And uncontained is a kidnapping. You don't know where they are. Uncontained, unknown location. We're going to try to get our way in a contained situation, probably by ego depletion, wearing them out, getting them to the point where they're just going to give in because they're tired. The only thing that I could, without knowing the context, anything you could do to humanize yourself and comply with what the bad guys want increases your chance of survival. So let's say you got ordered to go in a back room. You could look at the hostage taker and say, I'll do whatever you say, I'm Chris. Drop your name on them in a way so that you go from being a faceless person to somebody with a name. That increases the chances of your survival. Humanization. Whatever you can do to comply simultaneously, become more of a human being, because it's the opposite of what I was talking about before. If you're easier to kill if you've been dehumanized, you're harder to kill if you've been humanized. You're harder to harm. Like maybe they're not going to kill you, they're just going to hurt you. They're less likely to harm you if they know your first name.